On the Buzz Meter this Sunday, a partisan blame game erupts in the media after the horrific shooting of Republican Whip Steve Scalise and 4 others at a baseball practice.
Does it make it worse?
You want to know the truth?
Well, but do you rise above it and say,
no,
we all need to stay calm and focus on the work ahead of us?
You've had a series of things which send signals that tell people that it's okay to hate Trump, it's okay to think of Trump in violent terms, it's okay to consider assassinating Trump, and then suddenly we're supposed to rise above it.
Some on the hard left understand this, and that's why they support it, because political violence could lead to the dissolution of a country they despise.
It can be sort of exhausting and dispiriting in that there's immediately this sort of blaming, and there's look for who is the villain, and sort of connection from normal politics like Bernie Sanders. He volunteered for Bernie Sanders to ghastly attempted murder.
Radical leftism has always advocated violent revolution. So this guy was essentially radicalized by the left-wing media.
Do you worry that the left has gone too far in its rhetoric? If people are using rhetoric like this president is a traitor and the Republicans are treasonous and they're destroying the country and they're going to kill our people through health care and all this stuff, that might give the unhinged among you to an excuse or a target, as it were.
Yeah. The shooter was an anti-Trump liberal and Bernie Sanders volunteer who loved Rachel Maddow. But why do some pundits insist on engaging in guilt by association? As the Washington Post reports that Bob Mueller is examining obstruction of justice allegations against the president, Trump allies launch a media offensive against the special counsel.
It's a nightmare for anyone to be investigated by the FBI and the Justice Department, and it's particularly a nightmare for the President of the United States.
If President Trump really does fire Robert Mueller, he might as well just hire a skywriter to trace and smoke over the White House. I am super guilty.
And Mueller and Rod Rosenstein recuse themselves, resign immediately.
Is the reporting and the speculation getting way ahead of the facts? Megyn Kelly and NBC under fire for an interview with radio host and conspiracy theorist Alex Jones, airing tonight.
They call you the most paranoid man in America. Is that true?
Absolutely not. A paranoid person will be hiding out in their house, not venturing out in public. I go out there on the street and battle Black Lives Matter, the communists, point blank range.
Should she give a platform to a man who has called the Sandy Hook school shooting a hoax? Or is there a journalistic duty to hold him accountable? Plus, a mistrial for Bill Cosby as his wife accuses the media of blatantly vicious sensationalism. Just who is guilty here? I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is Media Buzz. There have been some calls for unity after the shooting across the river in Alexandria that left Steve Scalise in critical condition, now upgraded to serious condition. But the airwaves have been filled with angry finger-pointing by pundits and politicians. Joining us now to analyze the coverage, Guy Benson, political editor at townhall.com and a Fox News contributor. Aaron McPike, White House correspondent for Independent Journal Review. And Michael Tomasky, columnist for the Daily Beast. I have a simple question for all of you. Despite these calls of unity, as we're still sort of reeling from this horrible shooting, is there too much partisan finger-pointing in the media? Guy.
Yes, definitely, especially after a horrible event like this. And I think that people want to associate speech that they don't like with acts of violence. And I think that we saw a lot of that in 2011 after Gabby Giffords, where there was no evidence. There's more evidence of that here. I still think it's wrong.
Aaron.
There's guilt on both sides. Partisanship is bad on both sides. Now, to Newt Gingrich's point, I would say that there was a lot of nasty and hateful rhetoric about President Obama for his entirety of his 8 years in office. So this happens on both sides.
Michael.
Yeah, and back in 1992, I recall Newt Gingrich trying to blame that woman in South Carolina drowning her 2 sons on the Democratic Party. But put that aside, I actually think I'll dissent a little bit. Yes, on the airwaves, sure, it's ratings. But the politicians themselves, by and large, I think have been fairly responsible this past week and haven't really fanned the flames that much.
Perhaps this past week, but, you know, if you look at what they say routinely when they get invited on cable news shows, and the more vociferous or vehement they are, the more they pop, and the better it is for the shows. But let's drill back to the dead killer here. So this Hodgson guy, and as I said, he was a Trump hater, he despised Republicans. Doesn't mean that Bernie Sanders is responsible or Rachel Maddow, whose show he watches, is responsible. But I get the sense that some conservative pundits are suggesting, well, this is kind of typical of liberals or liberal hate.
Well, I think the frustration among many on the right is that we remember Tucson very well. I covered that closely. I recall the media coverage. And immediately, the left's narrative was Palin is responsible, the Tea Party is responsible, right-wing hate is responsible. There was not one scintilla of evidence for that. Her shooter was a schizophrenic who was not political and not remotely right-wing, and yet that big lie took root so deeply that the New York Times editorial board repeated it this week and had to correct themselves.
Yeah, I'll have more to say on that. Michael, you know, I agree with that in the sense that I covered that story as well. I wrote that day that it was ridiculous to blame Sarah Palin. But here's the thing. It kind of reinforces the point you're all making, is that both sides are perfectly willing to engage in extreme rhetoric, and particularly after a tragedy when you would think there'd be a sort of an instinct to tone it down.
Yes, they are, and it is unfortunate. And you know, at the time of the Gifford shooting, you're right. There was overreaction. There's no question about it. There was that bullseye thing which made people jump to conclusions, but they were wrong. But they were wrong conclusions.
Okay.
You know, now I believe that. You know, there was less of this, I thought, this time. I just want to say that again. I think there was less of it this time than there usually has been.
Maybe because of the partisan angle, though, right? I think that the left and the media is much more willing to run with the narrative that right-wingers are at fault than in the other direction. We saw a few questions about it, and then the media sort of just moved on. Let's have a nice time at the congressional baseball game. That's great, but if this was a right-winger shooting Democratic Congress people, we would be having a very different conversation. I am confident of that.
In this polarized media universe, when we talk about extreme rhetoric, and, you know, we're talking about not just politicians, but people who make their living spewing opinions online, on television, is this what sells? Is this what gets clicks and ratings?
I'm not even sure that I want to go down that road. I think in this case, obviously, because the shooter targeted partisan members of Congress, there is an element to that. But in so many mass shootings, there are political angles, and it's not just about partisanship, but you have shooters trying to make some kind of political statement. The thing that bothered me about some of the coverage in the days following was that a number of reporters asked about increased security for members of Congress. I think if I were the parent of a student in Newtown, or a member of that church in Charleston, or a teenager in Aurora, or a patron of the nightclub in Orlando, I would have been a little bit irritated that the media focused on security for members of Congress and not in these other cases. I think we went down a different road, and we could have done a better job in some of the questions that we're asking. Now, I know that there's always, after a number of mass shootings, on the right, at least, there's anger that the press always goes to gun control. But we do need to ask better questions about the intersection between access to guns and mental health, and we need to keep on those questions.
All right, let me go to some of the specifics as we're talking about the reactions, too. So right after the shooting, I thought that Paul Ryan in the House, and joined by Nancy Pelosi, you know, gave very unifying statements. Ryan talking about an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. But the next day, the House Minority Leader, Nancy Pelosi, talked about a case in which she had faced a stalker who made death threats, and listen to what she said.
I mean, one of the people that went to jail for threats to me, eventually, when they finally found him, because he was very resourceful in hiding, when he was being tried, his mother said he just watches too much Fox TV.
His mother said he watched Fox, therefore somehow Fox bears responsibility here?
You know, you have to ask Minority Leader Pelosi what her point was there. She also went on to say in this whole context that she thinks that this all got bad and really got worse starting in the 90s when Republicans decided that they were going to go down the route of personal destruction. I mean, yeah, it'd be very interesting to hear what Robert Bork might have to say about that, or Clarence Thomas.
Yeah, you can pick a lot of starting points in the past. Michael, Republican Congressman Steve King, very conservative, told a radio station in the aftermath of the shooting, "I do want to put some of this at the feet of Barack Obama. He contributed mightily to dividing us. He focused on our differences, and this is some of the fruits of that labor." So Obama's not even in office now, and gets this shot.
Yeah, well, that's kind of, to use a Trump word, sad. You know, there's way too much of this, and both sides do it at times like this, and you know, it just shouldn't happen.
Here's another example. A writer at the very liberal Huffington Post, Jesse Benn, we put that up on the screen, says in the wake of this shooting, "What's more harmful? Putting millions already on the margins more at risk via draconian policies, or shooting a racist lawmaker in the hip?" That seems to me to almost condone violence. Your thoughts?
Yeah, look, again, I think we're getting caught up in some of the same patterns. another thing that I think the media could do a better job of. The Congressman Mike Bost, who is the Illinois congressman who represents the shooter, his office received 14 messages in the last 6 months from the shooter saying that they were very angry messages. But he said he never had any threats. Well, I would like to see those messages that the shooter gave to the member of Congress through his office. You know, why, if they saw these things, didn't they do a better job trying to prevent it before? He might not have had any threats. Well, he said there were no threats, but if you're getting angry messages,
but members of Congress get angry messages every single day.
I understand, but we live in a society where we're promoting, if you see something, say something. Shouldn't we do a better job looking into some of these angry messages?
I think that if it goes into threat territory, yes, but just angry venting, which is what millions of people do all the time.
But we're giving him cover by just saying
we should have people like full-time minders on Twitter.
I'm sorry.
I have one more I want to get in here, and the reason I'm doing this is I think it's important to call out people who politicize a tragedy. This is Joy Reid. She hosts a show on MSNBC. She puts up this tweet that says, Rep. Scalise was shot by a white man with a violent background and saved by a black lesbian police officer. And yet, and lists a couple of his positions, Scalise opposed gay marriage and ban on semi-automatic weapons. So the guy faced an imminent risk of death. He is still in the hospital, and I'm not saying he's immune from political criticism, but isn't this wildly inappropriate? And why bring up race?
Yes, it's disgusting, and it's a really bad look for Ms. Reid, I think, in this case. And yet, the police officer, not thinking about her sexual identity or her race, did her job with heroism, and she saved a member of Congress, duly elected, who holds mainstream positions. That's it. And to go down the route that she was there very clearly, I think is really, really unfortunate.
Is there any hope, just briefly, that this has been such a wake-up call that there'll be a little bit of a lowering of the temperature, or is the toxic culture here to stay, and by next week everybody will be back to...
I'm afraid you know the answer to that question.
Yeah. Well, based on past mass shootings, you know, we all go crazy for a few days and then we move on.
It was nice to see these bipartisan expressions for a couple of days, but let's not count on anything.
All right, let us know what you think. MediaBuzz@foxnews.com. I'm sure you've got a lot of opinions about this. When we come back, the media go to DEFCON 1 over a newspaper story on the broadening of the special counsel's probe of President Trump. And later, Megyn Kelly facing a storm of protest over her interview with the controversial radio host, Alex Jones.